Hello. Today in my storytelling playlist, I'm going to do a companion video to my last storytelling video. The last one was about the burden of being a mystic. This one is going to be about the difficulty of dating a mystic. And I got the idea for this from one of my viewers, Cimmerian Fire. I like that YouTube handle, by the way. As a fan of Conan. Her comment made me think a little bit more about the burden of a mystic and how that translates into dating. So I want to go into that a little bit today. First, I'm not going to name any names and I'm not going to go into detail about these relationships because I don't think that's the right thing to do. But I am going to talk about how they kind of affected me and their role in my life. And also, I want to highlight how there can be so many kinds of relationships, and I think every bond is unique, but how these differences can result in things not working out. Love when the mystic is dormant. So for this one, I was quite young. I'm skipping all the teen awakening, sexual awakening stuff. I'm just kind of jumping to my first real relationship. At that time, the mystic in me was buried inside, but this other person, she could see glimmers of it, to the point where she gave me some gifts that kind of helped that blossom. The first being a deck of tarot cards. This deck here, I'll put on the screen. I love this deck, by the way. But there were other gifts, and maybe the whole time it didn't work out because she was kind of headed to a more normal domestic life, and I was, without my knowing it, heading in another direction. And I look back fondly on this relationship. It was quite innocent, but I wasn't me yet, if that makes sense. And the disintegration of this relationship actually was the catalyst for my first mystical awakening. Love when the mystic awakens. So I entered the dark night of the soul. After that other relationship ended, and for a few years I mutated. Eventually, I met a woman who was like a spiritual fire. A muse, a chore. This was perhaps the most passionate relationship I've ever had. It burned brightly and inspired me greatly. I've written about it a lot. But ultimately, it was destroyed by fate, maybe my own libertine ways. Because at that time, I wasn't very trusting in a relationship because of the other one collapsing. The previous one was quite a long-term relationship, so when it collapsed, I was definitely not ready to jump into anything. Maybe I was a little bit standoffish in that regard. It wasn't just me, it was the people around us, the situation around us. There was a bit of an age difference, so I think that was also a factor. I do think she saw the mystic in me, the beginning stages of it anyway. And her intuition really fueled my transformation. She was giving me the correct book at the right time, providing this very strong muse energy, which even to this day, I think influences my work to a degree. She was kind of a conduit of the divine to help me awaken even more. A few years later, I met another woman who would become my kind of initiatrix, but not in the way one might expect. While the previous relationship was raw, mystical energy, very powerful. It burned bright and it died, in a blaze is the best way to put it. This one was more about turning that energy into a practice. And it wasn't like she was teaching me this, but the situation we found ourselves in facilitated it. And I would say she was more of a facilitator, almost kind of a witness, someone who could verify the visions I had and the mystical experiences that we shared. But this was more about me gaining discipline over myself, at least from my point of view. I'm sure from her point of view, it's very different. But eventually I had to leave her because she kind of kept taking things from me. This is the person I mentioned in the other video with the parent situation, kind of nosy in my business. Aside from that, it was a situation where she just wanted too much from me. And the people around us didn't understand what our relationship was or where I was going or where she was going. It felt like a lot of things had to be kept hidden. I was kind of on edge through the whole thing. It also ended in a kind of a blaze not a good way. I would say up until this point, I wasn't very mature when dealing with the opposite sex. And, there was a lot of destruction that I did not intend, but it just kind of happened based upon the situation or my actions. So then there were some other situations of kind of friends with mystical benefits. At other moments, I had these friends with benefit situations. The first was an intellectual connection, but I don't think she saw what I really was, and she destroyed it because of that. Maybe she was afraid, I'm not really sure. And then she tried to destroy me through a kind of character assassination, partly because I just don't think she understood what I was getting at. And so, that was a big wake-up call for me. When you can get close to someone and then they can turn around with that amount of venom and scorn, is the best word. The second was someone I knew for a brief time, and she's introducing me to fasting and Eastern divination. But she was more of an artist than a mystic, in my opinion. And the world that she was part of was kind of the antithesis of mine. So I think that's one of the things about being a mystic, is that you enter these other worlds that people have and you just don't always fit. Sometimes you can. It's really interesting. I've met so many different people in my life in different situations. And sometimes I can click really easily with people that are not mystical at all. They just accept that part of me, and they're just like, okay, whatever, that's just part of who he is. But then there are other situations where you think the people might accept it, but then they can't. This was one of those situations. The third person was kind of like my sister in many ways. And what I mean is that she was kind of a mirror of me. She was once a librarian, she's a bookmaker. That's actually where I met her. She was an eroticist like myself. Maybe we were too much the same. It wasn't really a romantic relationship. We were kind of like kindred spirits. But again, the mystical in me was somehow hidden. She wanted to see it. A lot of times people want to see something, but that doesn't mean they can. I think it was just something outside of what she was capable of seeing. I tried. A lot of these situations, I tried a lot to try to communicate. But if you have gone through something like this and you do have this kind of mystical part of yourself, it is very hard to articulate into words. It's sort of something you just have to experience. And there were some situations where I was able to do this, either through some kind of altered state or something like that, or, a synchronicity happening where they were just like, what? How did that happen? Love with those who can't see you. And so time goes on, and I go deeper and deeper into mysticism, my own kind of unique world, through my art and everything. The deeper I go, the harder it is to find someone in this world or can see this world, or even in a neighboring one. I'm not expecting someone to exactly get me or understand me, but to be in a world parallel to mine, is the first step. I met someone else who connected with me. This was many years after these other relationships. In fact, I was single for quite a few years, 7 or 8 years, I think. It was a long time. It wasn't that I was intending to be that, but I just wasn't meeting anybody that could kind of like step up to the plate. But I met someone, and we connected through writing and our appreciation of music and a lot of our hobbies. And we were both living abroad, so we were in like this kind of crucible situation. I had been living abroad for a long time, but she had just started. And I was much older than her. Perhaps maybe I had gone too far, so like it was hard for me to put myself in her shoes. But she was also going through culture shock because she had just kind of moved out to a different country. So there was that effect on the whole thing as well. The only way to describe it was like walking down a really long hallway and you're glancing back at the door, but the door is miles behind you. You can see the door, you can see the doorway, but it seems so far away and almost insignificant to where you are now that you just know you're not, you can't delete that distance. It's going to be there, and it will always be there. I think that was part of the reason for the undoing. Love with a turbulent Sibyl. So in myth, there is this story of the man on a great journey, or like a mythic journey. I think everybody has these kind of archetypal moments in their lives. In my case, I was tired, I was worn out. The last relationship did not work. How many times can you step up to the plate and strike out and you're thinking, well, I'm just never going to do it again? You almost feel like maybe you're getting near the end of your life and that maybe you should never do it again. That maybe it's just easier and more economical for your life situation to just rely on yourself. But in these archetypal stories, the man that's worn out, the woman, whoever that's worn out, stumbles into a cave. And in the cave is a prophetess. She's never meant to be more than anything than that. But the person that is in this moment doesn't see that, right? She sparks another awakening. But this one isn't about this life. This one expands the vision beyond this life into eternity. So this is a very particular situation. I don't know if many people have actually gone through this kind of situation. I don't know. With a woman like this, you almost just have to hold on for dear life until it's over. And that's what I did. It didn't last long, lasted a few months, but it was chaotic and turbulent, and it changed my life forever because it got me to look at my life as a larger construct, not just the one that I'm in right now. And so it was very, it shook me. And even to this day, it still kind of shakes me. This was a few years ago now. So my point of all these stories is that everyone teaches you something. In normal relationships with normal people, this also happens. But when it comes to the mystical, the stakes are higher, I think. The breakdowns are more disastrous. The miscommunications are more profound. There's just this disconnect between what you want to present to the other person and what they see. And so, yeah, that's all I have for today. Take care. Have a good day.